Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful time here at the Shiny Conference 2023. We have an amazing lineup of talks and roundtable discussions prepared for you today. And to start things off, I'm going to ask a small question. How do you name your variables? Is it with dots or do you use snake case with underscores? Put down in the chat which gang you are in. And the next speaker we have here with us today has been using R since 1999, back when the underscore operator was used as an assignment operator. He has co authored the O'Reilly book, Efficient R Programming, and he is none other than Colin Gillespie, their CTO and co founder of Jumping Rivers, a full stack data science consultancy company based in the UK. Today, he'll be talking about securing your Shiny dashboard, and I'm sure this will be helpful to a lot of people today who want to put their Shiny application into production. Colin, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for making me feel old. Yes, I have been using R since 1999. When I did my PhD all those years ago, I think I even made the comment. In fact, I know I made the comment because it was a particularly good PhD of R might be quite useful. So clearly I've got foresight. Today I'm going to be talking about securing your Shiny dashboard. And it's going to be a little bit different, but hopefully you'll appreciate it. I should also mention, unfortunately, I've got a bit of a cold. So if all of a sudden the camera and the mic goes blank, it's just because I'm having a cough. So don't worry. Right, as I was introduced, I'm one of the co-founders of Jumping Rivers. So we started Jumping Rivers, perhaps the most mysterious data science name ever, 7 years ago. We are based over in Newcastle, but we've always been a remote company from day one. So we have people up and down the UK, and we've also got a few people based in South Africa, Austria, Sweden, so sort of scattered about. Around about 7 years ago, I got roped into writing a book. So the way you get roped into writing a book is someone asks you, would you write a book in 18 months' time? And you say yes, because in 18 months' time, you'll have so much more time. And so I wrote this book with Robin, which was a learning experience and lots of fun. A little bit about Jumping Rivers before I get going. So we basically do all things data science. So we do training from how to turn on your computer and start using R to getting started with Shiny, to accessibility and Shiny training, responsive Shiny apps, Python apps, Git, everything around data science. We do all the machine learning, DevOps stuff. We do a lot of managed POSIT services. So for example, we've just set up Connect in RStudio for a government in the UK. So that's multiple servers, Kubernetes, all those fun stuff. And we do the usual Shiny development and deployment. So we do all that sort of stuff. And we've been doing this for 6-7 years. It's lots of fun. And one final plug, we're organising 2 in-person conferences in the UK over the next year. So the first one is in London, and that's a Saturday's event. So as you might guess, it's based on a Saturday, and that's a low-cost community event. So Julia Selge is giving the keynote. So please, if you can make that, that'd be great. And we're also organising an in-person conference in Newcastle in October. So if you can make that, that's also great as well. For the Shining Production Conference, we've got our first speaker is George Stagg. So he was one of the developers of WebR that you might have seen going about. Right, let's get on. Over the last day and a half, everybody's been so optimistic and so happy. So I thought I'll just be a bit pessimistic and a bit Scottish and just say, well, security's hard. Which is not the most happy way to get started. And I thought, well, how can I prove to everyone that security is hard? And so I thought, well, I scanned the internet, there's lots of research, and I came up with this clip that just demonstrates how hard security is. And hopefully the volume will work.
Ariam, how are we doing on the data core audit?
The probe used multiple SQL injections, but I've yet to find any compromised files.
Right, so it's the 24th century, so 300 years from now, they're flying about space, defeating enemies left, right, and centre, and they're still having trouble securing the database from bad people, right? That's how hard security is. If they can't do it, we're in trouble. And this talk is a bit about how do we secure a Shiny app. So, wrong screen. Most, or perhaps all, talks that you've heard so far have been on the right-hand side of this slide, right? They've been talking about the how to build a dashboard, how to make your dashboard faster, how to scale it, how to build your dashboard quicker, how to make it more accessible, how to change your color palette, how to do drag and drop dashboards, all that wonderful stuff. Okay, so that's what most, if not all, talks at Shiny Conference have been on. This is where my talk is, right? So I'm somewhat as a loner, so I'm over on the left-hand side. So I'm not really been going to talk about Shiny that much, if at all, right? So I'm not going to talk about how to make your dashboard faster. I'm not going to talk about anything like that. I'm going to talk about a bit on the left. And you might think, have Epsilon made a mistake allowing me to give a talk? Well, probably, to be honest, but well, it's too late for them now. But I hope it's going to be useful. And in fact, I'm sure it should be useful. And I'd also like to point out that all the users are on my side of the screen and none of the users are on your side of the screen. So I'm just making that point. And at this point, I think I know what you're thinking, right? You're going to say, well, I'm a Shiny dev, and that's just not my job, right? Your day job is doing JavaScript, CSS, installing random R packages, shouting at Shiny server, right? That is your job, right? And in an ideal world, I would agree. But, and this is a sort of big but, Shiny devs have a habit of firing up Shiny servers, right? The number of companies and organizations we go into where a Shiny dev has just fired up a little Shiny server in the corner is almost all of them, right? This happens all the time. We're too curious for our own good. We know some Shiny, we want to let other people use the app. For whatever reason, we can't get it on the official infrastructure, so we fire up a Shiny server and then we put it somewhere. We can't expect IT to know everything, right? And IT, I just mean the people you ask for your computer resource in your organization. If you're a large organization, then you want to have that, be able to communicate with them. So it's useful knowing some of this stuff. If you're in a small organization, well, it's your responsibility to help them because you can't expect them to know everything either. Okay, so you can't expect IT. If we're honest, Shiny devs have got a habit of just adding random JavaScript code, right? You know, we just go, oh, shiny new widget, no pun intended. Let's throw that into our app. Not quite sure what it does, but we'll just put it in and hope for the best. So if we are willing and just putting JavaScript code in, then we really should take a bit of responsibility. And the last part is, I think it just makes you better at your job, knowing some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about. In the same way that if you're a wonderful, the best R programmer there ever has been, knowing a little bit of C will make you better, or knowing a little bit of Python will make you better. If you're a wonderful Shiny developer, then knowing a little bit about how people interact with your app will also make you better. It's not going to say that's your day job. It just helps you understand the context of how things work. Okay. So, suppose I was a bad guy, right? For full disclosure, this image is Liam, a security lead at Jumping Rivers. He uses me in all his talks as the bad guy, so I'm now finally getting my revenge. So, Liam, let's suppose I'm Liam and I'm the bad guy. And the question I want to ask is, how would I hack multiple websites at once? Okay, I'm a bit lazy as well, so I'm a lazy bad guy. And the idea of going to website A, then website B, then website C, then website D, to be honest, just sounds a bit like hard work. And well, I'm not really up for hard work. So what instead I want to do is I think I'll hack a third-party plugin, right? So a little bit of external JavaScript. And then if I can hack that, that will then propagate through all these other websites. And that's exactly what happened. So Browse Aloud is a plugin, and it's a useful plugin for making the web easier for people with dyslexia or low English comprehension. So you can imagine that most companies or organizations don't have the resources to build that, right? So you use a plugin instead. And what happened was some nasty people hacked this plugin and injected a link to CoinHive, and CoinHive is a Bitcoin miner. Okay. And by doing that, what that meant around about 5 years ago was this is a student loans company in the UK, and a little bit in the bottom shows that it's a link to CoinHive has been injected. So if you visited the student loans company in the UK, so it's a big proper website, you'd be running a Bitcoin miner for someone. If you visited the General Medical Council in the UK, you'd be running a Bitcoin miner. If you visited the NHS, you'd be running the Bitcoin miner. And just in case you're thinking it's just the folk from the UK that's incompetent, the United States courts, you'd also be running a Bitcoin miner. Right? So by hacking one place, you're able to do lots of damage. So when you visit a website, and remember, a Shiny app is a web page too, and so is a Quarto RMD generated docs, right? So when I'm talking about web page, I'm talking about Shiny, I'm talking about Quarto, I'm talking about RMD. All these things are websites. You say hi, so you send a little say, I would like the consultancy page of Jumping Rivers and my user agent's Chrome. And then the website says hi, goes, yep, that sounds good. I'll give you a status code of 200. That means I'm happy. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So these are server headers, right? These server headers are sent before you get access to the full web page. So your browser consumes this information and then processes your web page, okay? Crucially, these headers are added at the server level, okay? So it's not added at the application level, but usually at the server level. So when we set up something like Connect or a Shiny server for some of our clients, we would usually put it behind Nginx or Caddy or Apache, right? A web server. And the reason for that is these are fairly hardened tools that run hundreds of thousands of websites, okay? So set at the server level. What's in a header? Well, the one you might know is a status code, right? So you're probably familiar with the 200 status code. So the status code 200 means that everybody's happy, everybody's in a good place, the web page is happy. You might get a status code of 400. So a 404 is a well-known one, and a 404 just means, nope, not working, not great, this doesn't really go well. So that's part of the header. Afterwards, if you're interested, I wrote a quick little package for exploring server headers. So if you go to a GitHub page, Jumping Rivers /server headers, you can then run a little script called check, and it will give you all the server headers back in a web page. Okay, and you'll have links to these slides afterwards. But there are lots of headers, right? And what I'm going to do in the rest of this talk is consider some of the headers that are particularly useful for Shiny apps, right? And why do I think they're particularly useful for Shiny apps? Because I think Shiny apps are typically more sensitive. You know, they're running behind a firewall, or they're running with more sensitive data, right? It's not just sort of any old stuff. It's typically company data that's quite private. The big one I'm going to consider is something called a content security policy, also known as a CSP. And this header would avoid the CoinHive incident that we just talked about. So it avoids or disallows malicious JavaScript being added to your application. Okay. And why do we care about this? Well, Shiny apps contain stuff, and I'm using stuff in the most technical term as I can think of, and I just mean JavaScript, CSS, images. Lots of talks have been talking about adding stuff to to your apps. And here I've got a stuff of, I've got a link to some site, and then I'm going to pull in that stuff. Okay, so that's stuff. Here's an example of content security policy. Okay, so this line number 2 on this slide, is what you would add to Nginx or Apache or Posit Connect. Okay, so maybe a little bit of formatting, but pretty much. So what this is saying here is, well, you add this to your server, and then what happens is when the server says hi, when you visit it, this little line is also returned. So you can see the line right at the bottom of the page. It says content security policy, default source self, and then posit.io. Okay, and what does that mean? Well, that means that when the browser is processing your web page, when the browser is processing your Shiny application, it's only going to allow content allowed from self, so that could be, say, jumpingrivers.com, and posit. Any content from baddomain.com would be blocked by the browser, right? The browser would say no. So even if someone had managed to get into your web page and try to load something from CoinHive, the browser would block that because the server header is saying, no, that's not allowed. It actually blocks any domain, not self or posit, right? So that's quite a powerful thing. You know, that would have stopped the CoinHive. We can be more precise, right? So here's another example. And this time we're saying, well, we've got a default source self, and then we're allowed to load JavaScript from something like plotly.com, right? So that would mean I'm allowed to load JavaScript JS files from Plotly, but I wouldn't be allowed to load CSS. It would be loaded at Plotly. It'd be loaded. It would only be allowed JavaScript. And you can be really precise. These are just some of the ways you can specify content, right? So we can specify where you're allowed to load images from, where you're allowed to load media from, where you're allowed to load fonts from, where you're allowed to load JavaScripts from. The one at the bottom right, form action, is quite interesting. What that's telling you, or what that would tell the browser, is when someone clicks a form on your web page, only submit that information to another website that you specify. So again, that would allow someone hacking into your website and saying, actually, don't send it to jumpingrivers.com, send it to a bad place, right? By adding this to your server, that would stop that attack. Okay. Here's a question, and I'm sure you all have that answer, right? You all have the answer. What are your web dependencies, right? If I ask you, what JavaScript, what web dependencies do you have? So if we consider this example, this is where you say any content not self-repository is blocked. This will break your website a bit. By break, I mean things won't work, right? Lots of things just won't be loaded. Your fonts, your CSS files, maybe you've got a bit of data table, reactable, who knows? Lots of things will break. In our Shiny apps at Jumping Rivers, here's all the domains that we pull in, right? So on the left, when we scan through all our Shiny apps, those Shiny apps are pulling in things from jQuery.com, rstudio.com, gsdeliver.net, Plotly, Asana, OpenStreetMap, SpeedCheck, Calendar, right? All that stuff is being pulled in. And that means if anything goes wrong with those sites, it's automatically pulled into my application. And that doesn't mean just because you're behind a firewall, just because you're loading it, running it on your own laptop, if you're pulling in this external content, well, it's still going to appear in your user's browser. So question, you have lots of Shiny apps, or you have Posit Connect, so same sort of thing. How do you construct a policy? Well, here's another header. This is called Content Security Policy Report Only. And you can think of this as CSP in chatty mode, right? No blocking, it just tells you what's there, right? So this header isn't going to block anything, but it'll just sort of give you a little message saying, well, I would have blocked this, but I'm not going to, but just to let you know. Okay, so that's what CSP report only means, right? So it's not blocking, it's report only. And then there's another header called report to. So what this does is when it detects a CSP violation, the browser sends you some JSON. Why JSON? Because that's what the internet is built on, is JSON, right? And a little bit of JSON looks like this, okay? So it's what it's saying is, I went to jumpingrivers.com, you wanted me to load this script.js, but I'm not allowed to, and this is the reason why. There's no data issues here, right? We're not sending IP addresses or anything like that. It's just, this is what happened, right? So what this means is, I visit a website, I get some headers, I get jr.com script, that's okay, I'm happy with that, that's a good thing. But then you want me to load baddie.com, and at this point the browser just says, not a chance, get lost. But then it sends that information to that little blue drum, which is my database. So as a website owner, I know that my app is asking for something from baddie.com, even though I didn't expect that, right? So your users are telling you in real time what's going on, okay? And that's great. And when I say users are telling you, they don't have to install anything. They just have to use a browser made in the last 3 years, right? So it's a browser feature, not you need to install a plugin or anything like that. And we've set this up for Posit Connect. So the sorts of things that we do for organizations is we put this in someone's Posit Connect so they can see an overview of what's going on, right? And this is what happens in our Posit Connect. So Posit Connect is a platform by RStudio/Posit for hosting applications. And these are the directives on the left-hand side, right? So you can see that we've got script, we've got style. These are all the CSP directives. And then we've got a way of seeing what's going on, right? So we can drill down on the script tag, and we can go, oh, on our water body explorer, we're trying to load to cloudflare.com. And what this is telling me is my CSP policy as it stands is saying I should block this. And if I really want it, I should go and add it. Otherwise, it's going to get blocked when we implement the policy properly. So it's a really good way of seeing what's going on over lots of applications. And again, when I say application, I mean R Markdown, Quarto, and all that sort of stuff. It's a really good way of understanding what your developers are doing. And there's more. There's also another header called network error log, and this is a really handy thing. And again, the user is telling you what's going on, right? So here I've got a tab called abandoned, and here the browser would send me a little bit of JSON to say, I came to your website and then I just couldn't be bothered and I went away again and just abandoned it before it loaded. Or I've got a whole bunch of 400s, so 404, page not found. I've also got a 500. 500 is just when everything's lost and you've just completely stuffed, right? So again, it's a nice way of adding at the server level what's going on, and you can find out more about your applications, more about your users. So story so far is Shiny apps are web pages. Web pages use JavaScript. Bad people inject bad things into JavaScript. Bad people inject bad things into web pages. Content security policies to the rescue. And report 2 tells us what's happening. One more thing, and one other header, and then I'll just stop, is strict transport security. So here what happens is I've typed in jumpingrivers.com. The browser goes, oh, you're wanting to go to http jumpingrivers.com. The server says, no, I think you mean HTTPS. And I say, oh, sorry, my mistake. I mean HTTPS. These first 2 things happen over an unsecured channel, okay? So strict transport security solves that problem. So again, most Shiny apps are using sensitive information, right? And here we can just solve that by trying to enforce SSL from the start, right? It's a little thing, but how many people in the audience work for a farmer or a government or any of these sort of, agencies where data is really key? And then one last one is referrer policy controls what is sent when clicking on links. So imagine I've got jumpingrivers.com/secret link and I go to example.com. I can tell example.com absolutely nothing, right? They get diddly squat from me. I can tell them that they've come from Jumping Rivers, or I can tell them they've come from jumpingrivers.com/secret link. Again, links can contain information, especially in Shiny apps where we're developing something relatively sensitive, okay? So that's another way a referrer policy will set what you're sending on. So security is hard, but adding security headers isn't that hard. It does take a little bit of thought, does take a little bit of time, but it's not that hard. And I think it's something that as developers, we need to be aware, because we're putting up these applications and we're putting them up very quickly, sometimes in organizations where the IT team is relatively small. So we need to be aware. So security is for everyone. Security headers help with this. That little way, GitHub, Jumping Rivers /server headers is a way of just exploring headers in your own applications. And if you need any help, have any questions, by all means get in touch. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you found this useful. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Colin. That was super insightful, and I believe the audience absolutely loved the presentation as well. And there were some questions as well that came up on the chat while you were conducting your talk, so we can jump into them straight away. And one question that came from Luis was, just by running the website that Bitcoin mining would run, or only by clicking the injected link?
No, by visiting the website. So the minute you visited something like NHS, the NHS website was loading the JavaScript in the background. So the Bitcoin thing was the minute you visited the website, you're running JavaScript. That JavaScript was then running the Bitcoin miner, but they could have also run a keylogger. So everything you then typed would have went to somewhere bad. Okay.
Definitely, that makes sense, yes. And there's another question from Luis as well. How would you add headers without POSIT Connect? Where do you put that in?
So I believe you can put it into the configuration file. At Jumping Rivers, we typically put up another web server in front of that. So we normally use Nginx, but we're switching to Caddy. But all web servers are, whatever you want. But we typically use one of those web servers. Why? Because we're doing a lot of reverse proxies and other bits and pieces, and a web server does all those things. It's its day job. In the same way that a database is good with just data, a web server is good with that part. But I think you can also add it directly into POSIT Connect. But as I say, we typically put a web server in front of POSIT Connect to do that.
So what would happen is the browser would send the request, the proxy would take in the request, and then when sending it back, it would add those headers that were needed.
Yep.
Nice. Okay, that makes sense. Super. That was really helpful, and I think everyone really enjoyed it as well, based on all the clapping emojis that are there as well. Let's see if there are any other questions. Yes, there is a question by Pawan. Should there be a Shiny app to audit other Shiny app security? A bit of a meta question, I guess.
So this thing here, yes, but it's not clear what that is. So this one here is actually a Shiny app. So this table here is a Shiny app that we've developed. We're thinking about releasing it open source, but the trouble is, in order for this to work, you also need a database somewhere else, and you also need to set up APIs. So in order for that report to part, where I say, look, we're sending it to this blue bin, that red arrow encapsulates both a database in which to store that JSON, because it has to go somewhere, and then also an API endpoint in which to send that JSON to. So it's not just the same of, we'll have a Shiny app and that will do it. It's like we'll have a Shiny app to process the data and to set up. So it's a little bit more tricky. So if possible, we'll let other people use it, but it's just that we're trying to figure out if that's helpful with all the other bits and pieces.
And I believe if they want any further follow-up questions, they can also ask you on the Ask the Speakers channel in the Shiny conference as well. We do have some time for one last question, I believe. There is a question from Ashley. Beyond HTML escaping strings from APIs, are there any ways to prevent XSS attacks in Shiny applications?
Other than the I think content security policies would... That content security policies prevent cross-site scripting. The one thing that I sort of glossed over is that in order for this to work, you can't have JavaScript embedded inside your application. It all has to be on a resource. So if you were at jumpingrivers.com, you'd have to take your JavaScript out and put it into jumpingrivers.com/script.js. So you're not having script running inside your web page. So that's a little bit of a pain for a developer, but the benefit of that is it helps. There's also, this is only sort of touching the surface, and so there's ways of essentially pinning to hashes. So just now we can say we're allowed to use JavaScript from RStudio, and the hash of that JavaScript must equal this thing. And if the JavaScript changed, then you wouldn't be allowed to load that. So if someone hacked that, RStudio or anyone else, you wouldn't be affected. Again, it depends on how paranoid you want to be.
Yes, definitely. I mean, that's the next level of security if you are using hashes as well. All right. I think we are out of time as well, and we will be switching into the next talk. So thank you so much, Colin, for giving this insight on security, a part that was not touched in many talks as well. So thank you so much again, and we'll see you again next year as well. Let's see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you.